Joseph Abbeel's memoir offers a riveting glimpse into the life of a Flemish horseman conscripted into Napoleon's Grand Army. This is the 8th episode. We find Abbeel near Moscow. Let's begin. As I return to discussing the wounded, I must mention that we constantly heard reports that the Cossacks, positioned in front and behind the army, were killing all the wounded who were trying to return to France. Therefore, we decided, that is, those of us who could still walk, to follow our army and seek treatment in the hospitals of Moscow. However, it was horrific for those wounded in the legs to see their friends leave, their bunkmates or acquaintances, without being able to join them. They were all too aware that they could expect no comfort from anyone until peace was negotiated. Indeed, I can honestly say that my pen is inadequate to describe the sorrow and misery of these unfortunate souls, as could be heard and seen when we departed. Yet, before I continue, I wish to give a brief description of the situation in which our comrades found themselves. One should know that in and around the village, which had been completely burned down except for some remote barns, one saw nothing but legs, arms, and dead bodies. One heard nothing but groaning, wailing, and shouting. Most of the wounded were 600 to 700 hours' walk from home. They lacked food and had nothing to cover themselves with, despite the severe cold. There was no one left to tend to their wounds. They expected at any moment to be cruelly stripped of life by peasants who had fled to the forests or by the Cossacks. They had no hope of being transported. In short, only horrific things awaited them. Everyone who could walk, therefore, left, uttering the words, "Better the devil dead than myself." I had to go on foot because I had given up my horse to an uninjured sergeant whose horse had been shot. When I arrived in Moscow, I joined a large group of wounded. We made a tent or barrack. It was about 2 in the afternoon when Murat cautiously led some troops into the city, as he probably feared a trap. He was closely followed by a crowd of thousands of starving looters, who would have risked life and limb to seize some booty. They soon spread throughout the city. Wherever they went, they broke into buildings and looted everything, starting with the best houses and large stores. As a result, the bivouacs were quickly supplied with all sorts of precious foods and drinks, so much so that those searching for these goods were engulfed in the fire that rapidly spread through the drums around them. As soon as the fire was noticed, the French sounded the alarm to call everyone to help extinguish it. Everything possible was done, but it was all in vain, as the flames overpowered and drove everyone away, and in a short time, that beautiful and rich city was turned into a pile of ashes. We lost many well-stocked warehouses that fell prey to the flames. In an instant, supplies were lost that could have sustained the entire army for more than a year. It is true that the fire was horrific to behold, as the black smoke from tar, oil, and other similar substances gave the sky a hellish appearance. At the same time, one could hear the screams of people running through the burning streets to save their lives. But it became even more horrific when we walked through the city after the fire and found blackened corpses at every corner and place, people embracing each other, and rapists lying next to their victims. In another place, we saw a man and a woman lying hand in hand with 5 or 6, 7 children. No one is capable of describing the cruel and exceptional scenes we witnessed after the fire in this city. Because the city was so extensive and the houses, churches, and castles were further apart than in Flemish and other cities, some buildings were spared, but not many. The houses in this city were mostly made of wood, except for the bazaar, market, and the Kremlin, which were entirely built of stone. The Kremlin was situated on a hill, about in the middle of the city, with 6 churches and 4 gates within its walls. At each gate, there was a culverin or cannon. The city had more than 100 towers, 24 to 25 churches, many palaces, and precious buildings. Almost all the roofs of these buildings were covered with toll or a layer of metal. At the entrance of the city, there was a bridge over the river, and there were 2 wooden columns or pillars, which were painted in 3 colors. Moscow is built on a plain with a circumference of 10 to 12 hours walk, 40 to 50 kilometers, containing many villages and castles. The First Army Corps had taken the road back to Kaluga, but it was defeated and pushed back by Cossacks who had returned from Turkey. We stayed in our bivouac, without food and other necessities. Because the proclamation of September 7th had promised that we would take up winter quarters, we had not been economical with the food supplies that had initially been available. The cold also forced us to set our huts on fire to keep warm a bit, but this only made the situation worse, and we eventually lacked everything. From September 14th to October 23rd, we bivouacked in the vicinity of Moscow, without daring to go on looting expeditions, as the long-bearded men circled our camp. In the end, we only had horse meat to eat. Bread was no longer to be had anywhere, even if one had offered 2 gold pieces per pound. We had no barracks and no wood to make fire, and we were stiff from the cold. Many a soldier froze to death. We were continually bitten by the tiny six-legged creatures, which had not left us since the camp at Osius. Day by day, they multiplied by thousands. Daily we burned weapons, saddles, bridles, and whatever else we had. We killed the horses to eat them. There were no more draft horses for the cannons. Generals and other officers no longer appeared, as most had fled during the night. There was no more authority and no humanity among each other. All this and thousands of other inconveniences, which would take too long to describe, led us to decide to pack up and take to our heels. In the early morning of October 23, 1812, we set out in groups of 20, 30, and 40 men, most of whom were wounded and unarmed, to return to our homeland. We had no provisions with us, we were poorly dressed, went barefoot, and were half frozen, had several open wounds, and waded up to our bellies in mud. The condition we were in was pitiful and sad, as we were 600 to 700 hours' walk from home, did not speak the language, and did not know which way to go. This concludes the 8th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment. What do you think of Abbeel's adventures?